Coming to you from UBN Studios in Burbank, California. You're listening to the Unsugar-Coated Podcast with your hosts, Aalia and Alex and Alexandra Checa.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another podcast edition with Unsugar-Coated Media. I am Aalia.
And I am Alex, your co-host to Unsugar-Coated Podcast.
Well, we are super excited today. We have an amazing guest. I can't wait to share with you. One of Hollywood's leading independent producers, Julia Verdin, has produced 36 critically acclaimed feature films produced to date. Julia has received industry attention as a director with her award-winning directorial debut short film, Lost Girls, currently on Amazon Prime. The film has won several awards, including Best Social Impact Film, and was broadcast as part of an educational program on sex trafficking of minors. Also, the founder of Artists for Change, whose mission is to create media to raise awareness on key social issues and help educate and encourage other filmmakers to think about the type of content they create. Thank you for being here. Please, everyone, welcome Julia Verdin. So thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it. We want to talk to you because I feel, first of all, we met. You know Alex as well. Mm-hmm. And once a month you hold an amazing event through Artists for Change. And I'd love for you to share with our audience a bit about how that started for you.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me on your show. It's great to be here. And I founded Artists for Change because I saw the power of media to influence and allow for positive social change. When you look at a film like Blood Diamond, that film really changed the way people thought about buying diamonds. And as a result of the outcry around that film, a lot of diamond companies changed their policies. And to me, that was a huge stepping stone. And I think, we see on a day-to-day basis how film and television and all types of media influence fashion.
Absolutely.
And music and everything. And so I think we're at a very critical time right now where social change is needed. Mm-hmm. And there are so many issues where we need social change that I think media is a great way to start addressing some of this.
Absolutely.
So my personal passion and an issue that I'm very passionate about is child trafficking. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because I hate abuse to kids.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've over my travels as a filmmaker, I've done a lot of volunteer work in orphanages. Mm-hmm. I used to volunteer at a shelter down in the valley for runaway kids.
Right.
And a lot of those kids have been trafficked. Mm-hmm. And I met these sweet, little 14, 15-year-old girls, and the level of trauma that was evident just broke my heart. And when I heard the stories of some of the experience these really young girls had been through, it just became for me one of those issues that I couldn't look away from.
Yes.
And I applaud you for that because, as we are with Unsugar-Coated Media, exactly, we feel it's time to use our influence and abilities. And as a director, you're a creative, and the way you see things and being able to bring that to light. We both saw Lost Girls, which is on Amazon Prime yesterday. Loved it. Fantastic job. But more importantly, like you said, showcases that these are often innocent kids who are not looking, and they get pulled into these situations. They get kidnapped, or they get convinced, or they prey. In your expertise, what do you feel makes for a child who's more likely to be preyed upon?
Well, the traffickers are very clever. They know how to kind of spot vulnerable children, and a child who's has a single parent who's busy working 2 jobs and putting them through school,
right?
As we showed in the short film Lost Girls, is a prime target because the in that film the mother loved her daughter and was working really hard to give her a good education, but because she was working both a day and night shift, she wasn't able to give the daughter what she needed most.
Supervision.
A mother who was present and there and
well, that's what I mean by that.
Able to teach her how to do her makeup and all these other things. So when Cara, who is the kind of trafficker's recruiter, spots Marisol being ditched by some other teenagers, and kind of made fun of, she immediately befriends her.
Right.
And she sees a vulnerable girl who's looking for love and is able to kind of move on in that. And then she takes the role of the mother. There's what I think is a very moving scene when the mother comes in and finds a stranger in the house doing her daughter's makeup.
Right.
And her radar goes off and that was something that a mother should have been doing.
Sure.
For the daughters, helping them with
Very
those
interesting, yeah.
first steps.
Right.
And one of the things that really caught my attention was that you showed how when you're being sex trafficked, it doesn't always have to involve a creepy guy with a van.
Yeah.
It involves somebody that's actually your friend.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you Marisol, which was the girl who got trafficked, she was very vulnerable, and so Kara went in and she really thought that she was her friend, and all of a sudden she wakes up in a cage, which, by the way, how terrifying is that? And I'm pretty sure it happens a lot. But I think for a lot of people that are younger, I think they just think about being drugged in the club and then getting kidnapped, but it could be your friend. It could be somebody that's really trying to recruit you.
Well, from all the research I've done of talking to various detectives working in the area and NGOs and stuff, very often the recruiter is somebody of the child's age or just like a little bit older. So it might be a young guy who's the kind of like Romeo recruiter, or it might be another girl who's previously been trafficked and now kind of working as the top trafficker's top girl and actually doing the recruitment for them. So it's not that easy to see them coming.
Right. Sure.
And so, one of my hopes is that teenagers will see the film and gain a better understanding of ways that trafficking happens.
Right.
Traffickers often use the internet too. And sometimes, they'll keep an eye out on Facebook and Instagram for a teenager that's complaining about their home life or kind of clearly unhappy, and then they'll start bonding with them. And sometimes it's a process. Sometimes they build the relationship and what's called the grooming process.
Right, absolutely.
Can take like 3 months to a year.
Yeah.
And then they eventually make contact and meet up, and then they will tell their victim, what they want to hear, seem to be the sympathetic ear.
Right.
Everything that parents or other authority figures are not. And before the child knows what's happened, they've been talked into going on a trip or going to a party or going somewhere. The other way that people are often recruited into trafficking, for both sex trafficking and labor trafficking, is through job offers. So anytime a job seems too good to be true, it probably is. There's the model agency.
Absolutely. No, I remember when my sister and I were about 18, and she came home one day and she said, oh, there's this guy, he met me, he said, just give him some pictures and they're going to fly us to Mexico every week to go do modeling. And little did we know, we were probably like 2 steps away from being trafficked. Thank God we didn't go down. But, the reality is that unfortunately happens for a lot of people. I want to talk about some of the statistics. I want to ask you a question, but I also want to mention a couple of statistics that you share with your film. According to the International Labor Organization, 4.5 million people are victims, keyword there, of sex trafficking worldwide. 98% of all victims are women. 21% are minors and children. These are staggering, statistics.
So
and for me as a parent, I know what I've seen often are parents who don't want to believe, that at certain ages, either of my children were potential victims, both the male and female. And often, I had found myself in a situation where I found out a school coach from the after-school program was speaking inappropriately with my children and other kids via Instagram. I reported it to the police. My friend who's a detective with the Child Sex Crimes Unit said that's absolutely grooming. The guy was fired. But what was worse is parents around me did not want to believe that this guy was capable of doing something horrible. And when we live in the age where we see pictures of Harvey Weinstein and Jeff Epstein, and then we hear the stories of what was going on behind the scenes of things that happen, it's just really important for people to take note. You can't just look at someone and think, well, they seem cool. I like them. They're probably okay to be around, right? Because you could be putting your child within harm's way unknowingly. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree. And if you did a little bit of Google research and looked at pictures of traffickers that have actually been arrested,
Wow.
a lot of them don't look like you kind of picture or you think that they would look.
Right. Right.
You know, there was a Chinese grandmother who was a big trafficker. You know, they come in all types and varieties and sizes.
You made sure you put a female in one of the positions of the trafficking, and I thought that was also very important, an important detail. When you make these films, because you've done the short film, you also did a feature film, which focuses on the child's life coming back after being sex trafficked, right?
Yes, in the feature film, I didn't want to repeat what I'd already done on the short, and there's so many terrible stories that I've heard. So I came up with a story that focused both on a young girl who gets trafficked, and then when she's lucky enough to escape, the difficulties that she has reintegrating into society.
Sure.
And how the event of her being trafficked affects not just her, but the whole family unit. Because for the parents, it's also a tragedy because the daughter that comes back is very different,
right? Not the
from
child
the
that
daughter
left.
that they knew, and it's about them having to rebuild the relationship,
Right?
And also the young girl who's survived trafficking. It's very important, that survivors are not called victims because you don't want to stay in the story, but they're referred to as survivors.
Correct.
Because they have survived, and you want to see them get on the road to recovery.
Right, right.
And what often happens is that these girls want to testify and work with the police and help get other girls out, but they're also in an enormous amount of fear because they've been so brainwashed by the threats that they've got from the traffickers whilst being in captivity.
Right.
That they're afraid, and sometimes the traffickers will continue to find out where they are and continue to be that kind of lurking presence that threatens them. So it's very difficult for the police to get young girls to testify because of that. So it's very difficult to bring these people to justice. Right.
And then often there's smear campaigns. Suddenly a girl's whole life is pulled into question as a result of that. I know. It's definitely difficult, but I applaud you for making these films that really speak to these issues and what you're doing for Artists for Change. I have to say, do you find it more difficult to go out there and put a movie out like this? And I say that to say that we know in Hollywood, we want the excitement, we want the rom-coms, when you look at, who's buying films. You took a chance to really, create a movie that speaks to, and these projects that speak to these issues. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think any time you deal with a subject like this, it's difficult because one of the reasons why the problem has grown so exponentially is because it's not something that people want to look at.
Right.
People want to kind of like close their eyes off because it's so horrible and think, oh, that's a problem that's happening over there.
Correct.
But the reality is it's not anymore. It's happening right here today in our backyards. And if you do your research and you look at the news, you'll see, news reports of 15 minors being arrested in this place, 15 minors being arrested in this place. There was a big bust just recently in Florida.
Okay, yeah.
And so, it is hard facts that trafficking is happening and minors are being trafficked. Yet it seems to be something that people just don't want to deal with, want to sweep under the carpet, because it's painful. So when I made this movie, I did a lot of research on other movies that had been made on trafficking, and a lot of the audience comments were, worthy subject, but just couldn't watch it. It was too gratuitous. So I had to think about who did I want as my audience for the movie, and I wanted to make a movie that could really help educate teenagers and families as to what trafficking looks like and get the conversation going. So teenagers start to look out for each other and know that if they see something going on with one of their friends, to report it to someone in authority, and parents start to start this conversation early on in their child's development and build that level of trust. So if they do get an approach from a stranger, or someone starts building a relationship with them, they'll let their parent know.
Right.
And so I made a movie that was geared at a family teenage audience. So there's no nudity in it.
Right.
There's nothing over gratuitous, but yet it hits the point home that you get that trafficking is not something that you would want to happen to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or any child. They don't have to be your own, just any child.
Yeah.
It's horrible, and a person, especially. But I wanted to say that so outside of Artists for Change, you also work with other organizations. You recently, and we have a picture of it, you were at FatherCon, and you had the gentleman at your last event who put that event on. And what I found was so significant about what he spoke of, and I want you to talk about that, was not just that this is happening to children, but how we're dealing with the men in our society, because there's a demand for this issue. There's a demand for the sex trafficking. And until that is corrected, we will not see progress in this.
Well, I think you're right, Aalia. I think a big issue that has to be addressed is the re-education of men, because it is just not acceptable to pay an underage girl for sex, and to and while there's a demand, there's always going to be a need to supply. So if the demand was cut off, there would be no need to supply.
Right.
And so at FatherCon, Patrick Erlandson, who was the champion of FatherCon, is on our board, and a wonderful individual who's worked for many years in trafficking. The goal of FatherCon was to inspire fathers to be present for their kids, and also to be kind of pillars of their communities. Right. Because people are needed to stand up for those kids that don't have present parents.
Right.
And historically, the males have always been the ones who are the protectors and protect communities and protect their families. And so we need to inspire people to get back to that.
Yes, I agree with you.
And we had a variety of expert speakers. One of them talked about how parents could monitor their children's internet use and the various ways internet predators work. And I also think it's important to educate the younger generation on how to treat women.
Right.
Because one of the problems is now most teenagers get their kind of first sex education, as it were, through porn films.
Right.
And often these porn films can be very violent. And so when teenage boys are watching porn films, they think these women are having fun, and they think that this is an acceptable way to treat women.
Right.
And so that myth grows, and it's just not. And I think that's something that has to be addressed. Love should be a beautiful thing, and making love should be a beautiful coming together of two parties, full of gentleness and love and romance, right? It shouldn't be kind of violent or in any way abusive, and it should be between two consenting adults.
Absolutely. I my oldest daughter, I remember when she first time asked me, she's now 20, she's about to have her own son, and she's about to be 23, but when she was a teenager, she asked me about sex, and I wasn't going to lie to her. I said, sex is a great thing, because she actually started, I know, Mom, sex is bad. And I go, no, sex is wonderful. It was a wonderful thing when you're older and you understand the responsibility of it, and you understand what can happen, and you also understand that potentially the person you're having sex with, especially this day, can use those things against you. How many kids are, there was a young girl who had some text messaging. I guess he came out that he was gay. Actually, it was a young boy, and he had texted a classmate about being gay, and then he shared that with the entire school, and he committed suicide as a result of it. And it's just, how you're trusting people anyways with sex, and that's something that, I agree with. Education is a big part of hopefully keeping our children and being good examples for them as well, and giving them the real dose of truth on these topics, even when they're difficult. One of the, also when you talked about that, this is happening in our backyard because what was brought up even at that particular last event was right in Hollywood Hills, a neighbor. So what do? I'm jogging in the morning and I see something suspicious, which is what had happened. A woman saw something suspicious. She reported it to the police, and it turns out right in Hollywood Hills was a house full of young girls that had been kidnapped and were being sex trafficked.
Well, I think the important thing is that you report it to the police, because sometimes these people are armed and dangerous.
Right.
So you don't want to risk your personal safety by jumping into a situation where you don't know quite what there is in the other end. But just being vigilant, recently there's been some wonderful American Airlines, one of the leaders in this area, of training airline staff to watch out for potential trafficking situations.
That's crazy that you say that, because I just for Thanksgiving sent my daughter on the train, and do you remember I told you they went through this whole process? I had to be interviewed. They had to interview her separately because I sent her on the train to San Diego to see my sister. And I said, "Is all of this for sex trafficking?" And he said, "Yes, it is." And I said, "Okay, well then good. I'm okay with that, so long as you're being you guys. But we shouldn't feel like we're being interrogated in that sense, because it is for our children's safety. But yeah, it's amazing how it's amazing how in that industry, in the airline, train, and other methods, that they have to be aware and look out for.
And hotels. I mean, more training with hotel staff could be super helpful, because often, often a lot of trafficking goes on in hotels, motels, or even where you're living. If you see a house where there's a lot of kind of like odd coming and goings and people that seemed inappropriately matched, if in doubt, check it out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Signs of someone who's being trafficked are usually they have like no possessions on them. They'll often look down because they're kind of afraid. They often appear a little like malnourished or really tired because they haven't had enough sleep. If there's somebody with them, often that person is answering all the questions.
Right.
And they're afraid to speak. So I would say if there's any situation that you think looks suspicious, it's better safe than sorry, and it's better to report it.
Intuition is a pretty strong thing. So I have another question, topic on this, because my 12-year-old is a 12-year-old daughter, and she actually bikes to school by herself, and so I'm always like, I want her to be independent, but I'm also, of course, I'm constantly concerned. Is she safe? Is she going to be okay? If somebody, so this issue came up where I have on location. I find them. I have them. I track them, and the conversation came up about when the kids were in college. Would we do that? And I can't lie. Said, well, probably for your brother I wouldn't, but for you I would. I would want to. And she was so offended by this. She's like, I shouldn't have to be checked on. And I said, well, it's because we care. I'm not trying to be a bad or overzealous mom, but I mean, just so you know, if we, because they give tips, right? They give tips for young girls. If you're by yourself or you're going somewhere, take a picture of the license plate. Let your family know when you're coming back. So for her, but she was so offended that she felt, well, I should be just as independent as a boy. Why should I have to be any more careful? What do you think about that? How do we teach our young girls to understand? I get it. You don't want to give up your privacy. You feel you should, but you're still a young girl, and we want to protect you.
It's difficult, but I think a lot of it is to do with the building of the trust. That if you build good trust with your teenage daughter, and so that if something does happen, they're going to tell you about it.
Sure, that
is kind of like key,
right?
But taking kind of appropriate safety measures, I think, is a good thing.
I do too, and I do, but I get it. The whole boy thing. She's like, well, that's not fair. He's a boy. Why do boys get it? They're perceived as more safe, right?
Right, even though they're not, because for child trafficking, I mean, there's a ton of boys in there too.
Well, I mean, my son, though, once they get past like 6 foot, I think it is a little bit less likely that he might be child trafficked. But I mean, her point is, why should I have to adhere to certain precautions that he doesn't because he's a boy?
It's a difficult dilemma, because you want your child to feel independent, and you don't, in terms of building that level of trust, you don't want the child to feel that you're spying on them,
Right.
or they have no freedom, because that's going to kind of make them go in the opposite direction and
Sure.
withdraw.
Sure.
So
Well, I let them
think-
see my location too. I tell them, "Look, I'm a grown woman, and I'll let you know my location because I'm not. I'm gonna monkey see. I'm gonna represent what I'm telling you because God forbid something happened to me, I would want you to know. And I think that's the other thing you scare. Well, just in case, and then your kids look at you like, just in case what?
What?
Like, why
Yeah.
does this have to be something that's gonna happen to me? And I'm like, because unfortunately, the reality is that it could. While you're, it's a hard reality.
Maybe you should
but,
just let all of your kids share
well, they do. Well,
instead of saying only you but not your brother, or like only.
Well, we were talking about college, but now they both have to
but
share
like, I
theirs.
think it's because she's young too. I mean, once you get older, you understand why.
Sure.
I'm old now. I'm not old, but I'm older. I still share location with my mom just because
Well, that's nice to know. That gives me hope.
Absolutely. I mean,
That
when
gives
you were
me hope.
12, you wanted to be independent, and I
Sure.
don't need anybody, and I know what I'm doing.
Sure. So, how do you feel that what you've seen? You talked about working with these orphanages and young women. How do you think this impacts not only the current projects that you're doing, but the future projects that you look to do?
I think in terms of, people tend to go to a documentary when they're already interested in a subject, but a narrative film, because you have the experience of emotionally engaging with a character, can get people interested. So what we tend to do, and I find this to be very effective, is we create narrative media, whether it be a feature film or a short film, and then have an educational kind of documentary type piece as follow-up that's got more the facts, statistics, various interview with experts on the subject matter, so they can actually learn more detail
Right.
about the issue.
Right. Right. That's helpful. And what are you working on now? What's coming from Julia Verdin in the future?
Well, I definitely want to do something on the kind of male perspective to really make
Yes.
men think about this issue.
Yeah.
So I'm working on that right
That's-
now, and then one of the problems that I have is time, because there's so many issues that I want to tackle.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Like teen bullying, the homeless crisis.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's horrendous in right here in Los Angeles right
Which
now.
does tie in because actually a lot of homeless children and teenagers are easily sex trafficked,
Way easy.
And what's very interesting is we talk about, and I know of another woman's story. We'd actually, Unsugarcoated Media had wanted to partner with her, and we're looking to promote a book that she has chosen to not come out with because apparently her story is so deep, and so she can't. She came to that decision, and I wanted to support that. But the reality is that it affected her, and she went through kind of the same thing. She came back to her family, and now there was a mark on her. She was no longer, even in the community, she was no longer the same. And getting out there and sharing these perspectives are important to just in general for education as well as for entertainment, in the sense of entertainment in the sense of media, but education in the sense of just the message, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's
Well, I think a very important thing for teenagers to know is you've got to really think twice about running away from home today, because 98% of teenagers that run away from home are going to be trafficked within 48 hours of arrival at their destination.
right.
And that is pretty scary statistic.
Right.
And often when teenagers have that moment of like, I've had it, I'm running away,
Right.
they just don't think of the consequences of what could happen.
Sure.
You just want to get away from the situation, so you're not thinking about the future.
Right.
So I think kind of education on making resources available to teenagers who are having any type of problem,
Right.
and more encouragement to reach out and talk to people, whether it be volunteer hotlines or
Right.
whatever, or whatever it is, or for friends just to be aware of that and support each other more.
Mm-hmm.
But to have this conversation amongst teenagers that running away is not a good solution
Yeah,
in the
it's
world
not the
today.
answer. Right. I mean, I was homeless
and I
at
went
14,
down
so yeah.
to one of the bus stations when we were kind of shooting some behind the scenes footage.
Mm-hmm.
And you could actually kind of like see, people kind of like loitering around. So you could really
Right.
see how easy it would be to happen. And when a teenager arrives at a destination and they've suddenly like done the act and they don't know where to go and they're looking around like a deer in the headlights, someone comes up and offers somewhere to stay or a potential job.
Right.
They have no other options, so they're going to go along with it.
Sure. Well,
And-
you have a lot of teenagers that leave what they consider their life to be a bad dream. They don't realize they're heading right into a nightmare. My friend Detective Castillo with the LAPD, he has said, and he worked as a detective for 35 years with the Child Sex Division and Crimes Against Youth, and he says, I've looked the devil in the eyes many times. Many times I've looked the devil in the eyes speaking to a predator, speaking to somebody who can do these things to children. They do exist. And, I was homeless at 14 years old as a result of two selfish parents that just didn't want to raise a teenager anymore. and I was very fortunate that that didn't happen to me. But I know of people who that did. And it just, it's amazing how, you look at something like the film that you've produced and directed, and you just have to look at it and say, if I'm not careful, this could be someone I know or someone I care about. And maybe that would make us be a little bit more proactive in doing something, which is why we're here doing, we want to talk about these issues. We want people, the fun, light stuff is great, but the heavy stuff is still also required. And we cannot look away anymore. Like you said, it's important. So,
Absolutely, and for the young women that, the drive and stuff like that, just remember that when you are out somewhere, to not fully unlock all of your doors, just unlock your door. And I heard about this new thing of how to kidnap women, and they wrap a sweater on your windshield now, so they get you when you're trying to undo it.
they put it on your windshield?
On your windshield.
So they look for ways to distract
That's how
you so they can grab
you.
you.
That's how they get you, and that's how they take you. And usually, I do it by default now, but I only click my key to open the door once because I don't want all my doors to be open.
Right.
Which is crazy because that's in my head all the time that I go out now, which is why I understand why your daughter is saying, well, why do I have to be careful? And it's sad, but you have to be careful.
Right.
I get it. We all want to be equal, whatever, but things happen more to women than to men, and you just have to be careful.
Well, and yeah, especially for this particular topic, of course.
Of course.
Different set of issues with my son when he gets older, for sure. But so when it comes to this stuff, how did you, in the best success stories that you've had the opportunity to work with, was it just someone who reported it and got them out? I know that for ones who are sex trafficked, it's very hard to get away. Like, it's not like they can just leave. People, and something I've heard in the past from other people is that they have, especially when it comes to women who are being sex trafficked. Actually, that's what I was going to say earlier. A woman who's being sex trafficked, if you're walking down the street and you see a woman who's being sex trafficked or a sex trafficker, you often don't look at them, right? We just look away. And it was interesting because one of the testimonies of a woman said, people never looked at me. They looked at me like I was trash, I was dirty, but they had no idea how much pain I was in and how much I wanted to be out of there. But there was so they often don't feel like, so, if I was walking down the street and I did see someone, would it be like totally off the cuff if I was like, are you okay? If I looked them in the eye and I said, are you okay? Are you okay? You know what I mean? Because sometimes those three words, are you okay?
I think that's a wonderful thing to. I think that's a wonderful thing to do, because it's when someone's been trafficked or when someone's been through any sort of very violent abuse, or even when you're like homeless out on the street, you feel a sense that you're losing your humanity, right? Mm-hmm. And anything that we can do to bring back that faith in humanity is important.
Right.
And so I think for all of us in society to see the beauty in others and see the humanness in us all is really vital today.
Well, and the pain.
Yeah.
Because I guarantee if you look in the eyes of somebody on the street, you know, it's not like they're happy. Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I mean, more often than not. But I mean, I think that, you know, and we as people going about our day often have a hard time looking at that, right? It's just, you know, for one particular panel they said people will not look at that because it's a reminder of how close we can be, how society can throw you out, or there's this perception if I don't do this and don't do this and don't do that, I'm going to end up out there and society won't accept me anymore, right? You're tossed aside. And that loss, like you said, of humanity, I mean, there's just it's amazing how we could help each other more, but we choose not to.
And that's one of the things that we try to do with Artists for Change is really encourage people to band together. And in whatever way, I'm a great believer in that everybody can do something, however small.
Absolutely.
Even if it's just smiling.
Yes.
You know, a smile, smiling at people everywhere you can go can have an enormous power. And you never know, just by at that moment giving a kind word to someone and smiling at them can stop them from going home and committing suicide that night.
Right, right,
So,
absolutely.
so I think we've come to this time in society where, with all the advances in technology and social media and everything else, that it's become like such a me culture, with everybody kind of living in these kind of bubble worlds of like, look at me. How many followers have I got? Look at me, you know, who's liked my posts or immersed in video games and everything. It's really time to let go of it. And I hope 2020 will be the year when the change starts happening and get back to this me culture, this we culture of how can we together collectively work together to make this a better world.
Absolutely.
By doing in whatever ways that we are able, making little contributions. And it might be as simple as smiling and asking a homeless person if they're okay, or giving them a blanket, or donating to an organization, or volunteering, or
There's plenty
doing
of them
some
out there
type
that
of
need
service, because
assistance.
there are so many organizations out there that need help, that need volunteers, and there's so much to be done.
Absolutely. And you are doing a fantastic job with Artists for Change. And you know, like you said, it's just about showing up. Not maybe you don't have, you know, the potential to fix every problem in the world, but together we can make a difference. And so what you're doing with Artists for Change and with your film projects, it's amazing. We applaud you. We're so glad to have you here. We actually have some rapid fire questions for you. Okay.
Sure.
Alexandra, you go ahead and take this one away.
Okay. Are you ready, Julia?
I'm ready.
Okay. Favorite actor to have worked with so far?
Favorite actor to have worked with so far? I was pretty thrilled to work with William Hurt years ago, because he's just brilliant.
Very nice. Yes. Okay.
If you could be from any other decade, which one would it be?
I think the 20s.
Yeah.
I love
like
the
that.
idea of the
Yes.
swinging
I like
20s
girls
and
being-
Charleston and
I agree.
everything.
Yes.
Would you rather be able to speak every other language in the world, or be able to speak to animals?
I quite like to be able to speak to animals.
Yeah.
Animals,
I knew you were
I love animals.
they're such sweet, vulnerable
Yeah.
creatures. And, you know, we have a little dog.
That would be some
So-
cool thing. That reminds me of the movie Beastmaster, in a way. Or like if you could just talk to the animals and just think it, that'd be pretty cool.
That'd be amazing. First celebrity crush.
First celebrity
crush.
Brad Pitt.
That was your first?
That was easy. That was easy. Okay, and the last one, dark chocolate or milk chocolate?
Dark chocolate.
Yes.
That's antioxidants, right?
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
really
yeah, dark chocolate's actually quite good for you.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you, so if people want to find you on Instagram or go to your website, why don't you tell our audience where they can find you at?
So you can find Artists for Change Instagram is at AFC_LA. The Artists for Change website is artists4change.org. And you can find me on Instagram at Julia Verdin.
Yes.
And I'm also on Twitter at Julia Verdin.
Your Instagram is so cute. You've got Snoop Dogg on. It's like you're like another. I mean, it's just incredible. You've got, of course, Leo on there, and you have all these amazing things. I think that it's wonderful that you remain a very humble and motivated woman. You've done a lot for women in film as well, and I think that there's just so much more in store that I can't wait to watch you do it and pull it off. And thank you for being part of our show today,
Thank you.
Julia. It
Thank
means
you.
a lot.
Well, thank you for having me on it and spreading the word. And let's all make change together.
Amen to that.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Be sure to subscribe on our for our podcast, Unsugar Coated Podcast. We'll see you next time. Take care.
You've been listening to the Unsugar Coated Podcast with your hosts, Aalia and Alex.